Good morning, everyone. So we'd like to again welcome you and thank you so much for your interest in the contractor performance rating system. We've been working on this for quite some time, for over a year. It was one of the things that our leadership, Carlos and Andrea, asked me to spearhead when I first came on board. Of course, I had accepted the job before they had told me about all of these things, all these initiatives. But it's really very exciting, and we've worked really hard on it, and we have had many of you participate. And we appreciate all the time and energy and information that you provided us, because in some instances, I recognize a few people here, you actually gave us demonstrations and provided a lot of background information, and we so appreciate that. We would not be where we are today without that information. And I think it's important for the suppliers that weren't involved thus far that you realize that we did have a great group of suppliers, state people. So we had a number of meetings. We had at least 4 different task force meetings with suppliers, and it was a fairly open environment. There was a couple times where we were asked to give another forum or another work group meeting because certain people could not attend the ones we had scheduled. So we felt like we had really opened it up and gotten a lot of input and comments, so we appreciate that. And what I'd like to do now is introduce Carlos, who will be presenting where we are today, so that you all know about that and can provide us input as you see fit. So thank you very much and welcome, Carlos.
So thank you, Marnell, and thank you to all of you for your patience. While I'm up here thanking folks, I want to thank particularly Marnell, Ben, Racine, and all the folks in the statewide Technology Procurement Division for their hard work on this. And even before those guys were there, Greg was part of this, Pete Mastella, some of the other folks that were in the division when we started this and have now gone on to other things. So it's been a lot of work for them. I know I've kind of tried their patience a lot. So thank you for putting up with us, and then also for the great work that you guys have done. I think this is something that will be very useful for us at the state, and in the long run, I think really produce some good results. And I also want to thank all the work group participants, not only the folks from the vendor community, which we did have quite a few, but also the folks from the state government that we leaned on and asked for their expertise, especially a lot of folks in the procurement area. So I want to thank all of them as well for their work. So let me talk a little bit about today. Here's our game plan for today. It's pretty basic. We're going to share with you what the proposed rating system is, what it looks like, and share a little bit of the journey of how we got here. And then really the purpose of this forum is just to solicit feedback from you, because we want to make sure that this thing is as ready to go, as fully baked as it can be before we roll it out. We'll build in some time for your feedback, for some Q&A, and then also to talk about where do we go from here, what are the next steps. I think the first question probably on folks' mind is, well, why are we even doing this thing? And so I thought I'd go through a little bit of background and history to tell you about our thinking as to why to go about doing this. And I think the answer is pretty simple. The answer is we want better performance on projects, and performance all the way around. Those of you that have been doing business with state for a while, and those of you that have been in government for a while, we've all seen the headlines. We've all been to the hearings when a project goes off the rails. From my agency's perspective, we have an oversight responsibility, and so we provide oversight on projects, and we see a lot of the stuff that never makes it into the headlines or never makes it into the hearings. We see what happens on projects when the projects aren't well executed, well planned, and when the teams just don't perform too well. I guess that the hearings, the headlines, they're, from my perspective, distracting, but that's not really the worst of it. The worst of it is that very often by the time a department gets approval and authority and funding to go forward with a project, it's because they really need it. They really need a technology solution that will help them run some aspect of their business and in some form or fashion to better serve their constituents. So when those things blow up, it not only creates a lot of overhead and attention, it also means that that agency isn't getting what it needs in the way of technology or in the way of a solution that can help it run its operations. And so for me, that's the worst part of it. The other part of it too is that it wastes a lot of money. And the money isn't ours. The money's our taxpayers, right? And so what we're after fundamentally is improving performance on projects. And so we've done a lot of stuff to try and help the state, and I'll cover that in a little bit, to try and help the state do a better job of performing its end of the responsibilities. But at some point, we also have to get into, okay, sometimes the issue isn't just the state or the state's teams, or that we had a bad procurement, or that our requirements weren't clear. Sometimes it really is that contractors don't really perform to the level of expectation, or at least to what we agreed to. So that's really what's behind this. It's been a big, important initiative for the administration, for the executive branch, of improving project performance, but also getting a handle on, who are our partners? What sort of value are we getting from them? But it's not only us, and it's not only the media. The legislature has had a great deal of interest in this too. So I wanted to share with you just a couple of examples of this. So these are from excerpts, a couple of excerpts, not too many of them, from some recent hearings just that I've sat in. And I've sat in, unfortunately, on too many of these hearings where they're discussing projects that don't work too well.
I heard pieces of testimony with, again, respect to the contracting process I wanted to follow up on. Understanding that Accenture has contracted out with other state agencies and departments for technology purposes. And then I heard separate testimony, but we don't know what their performance was. We don't know how well they performed and if they had problems there. Are there methods in our contracting system for looking at prior existing relationships, and has a contractor potentially totally dropped the ball, and so that the left hand in the government's not talking to the right hand, we just repeat that problem?
So that was from one of the oversight hearings, again, on a project that was having some challenges. Let me go to another one. I think this might have been actually the same hearing.
For all your audits, it would be helpful for the appropriate committees to know. And then just another follow-up on the idea of the report card. It would be, I think that's a great idea. I always think it's great to get your report card, but what happens when you take it home is really the question, right? So we need a little accountability on that. But I think involving the auditor as you develop this report card system would be very helpful,
Sure.
Given what the time and the expertise that they have put in to understanding the problems. Let's make sure that there is that look at, from the auditor's perspective, of this idea of keeping track of how performance is actually taking place.
Okay, and then just one more here. So there was a piece of legislation in this last session that actually was going to require us to develop a rating system like this. So I just wanted to play a little bit of the discussion around that bill, and you'll see it's trying to achieve the same goals.
California Department of Technology to create a standardized contractor performance assessment reporting system to evaluate how well contractors perform on large IT projects. As we are all very aware, California, like many other states, has had a long history of unsuccessful IT projects. As indicated in recent state auditor reports, between 1994 and 2013, the state terminated or suspended 7 IT projects after spending nearly $1 billion. Currently, the state has a number of IT projects under development that are reported to cost more than $4 billion. AB 522 will allow the state to evaluate how well a contractor performed on these IT projects by creating a contractor performance assessment reporting system. The data that is collected through the performance assessment on the contractors will then be taken into consideration in the evaluation and awarding of any future state IT projects. Using this data will serve as a valuable tool to ensure vendor quality, but also to ensure that California has an accurate picture of the vendor it is entering into a contract with. This is a common sense measure that received bipartisan support in both policy and fiscal committees. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
So a couple of things that Assemblywoman Burke points out there that I think are salient and informative for us. One is the bill received bipartisan support, right? So, and it made it to the governor's desk. That means it got through both houses of the legislature, and both sides of the aisle were in support of it. The other thing she talked about is, hey, when these projects go off the rails or when they go wrong, it costs a lot of money, right? So that's something that's not lost on us as well. So, our focus is, let's make sure we have a way of improving performance. Let's make sure that we have a way of understanding if somebody just really doesn't perform very well. My point in bringing this up is it's an important initiative for us in the administration. It's an important initiative, as you can see, to the folks in the legislature as well. We want to improve how we do on California's track record. So in that regard, we didn't just come out and say, okay, well then, let's just go after all the vendors. Let's just go and see how they're doing and document their performance. We started actually initially with improving performance of state agencies. If any of you were at the State of Technology presentation about a week and a half ago, this will be a repeat of what you heard there. But I just wanted to reiterate and remind you that we started with the state first. So the first thing that we did is we looked at how do we actually approve projects. Starting at the very beginning, from our oversight perspective, we see what happens when a project isn't well planned. Everybody suffers the consequences. And so one of the things that we did is we looked at our FSR and SPR process and said, does it actually work? Does it work to position an agency for success? And our conclusion was, no, not really. It doesn't add as much value as we would hope. One, it doesn't really make sure that organizations do a thorough and comprehensive planning process. Also, it presents a false picture to decision makers, whether you're in the budget side of the house or in the legislature, in terms of what it's actually going to cost and how long it's actually going to take. And the process itself kind of incented, having been a former State Department CIO, it kind of incented you to lowball those things because you wanted approval. You wanted to get approval to go forward. You wanted to get approval for budget, so you're incented to lowball, what you thought it was going to cost and how long it was going to take. So we thought we got to remake that process. So we've done that. We've done that through our staged approval process, which now forces departments to do a more comprehensive job up front of everything from cataloging and understanding and documenting what their business problem and business case is, all the way through planning what's it actually going to take to run a project. What organizational changes and structures do you need in place? What decision-making structures do you need to have in place? Do you have support from your business side of the house and executive leadership to support re-engineering business processes before you go out and seek a technology solution? So the first two stages of that have been delivered. The next two stages will come out in January and then in July, right? Which actually takes all that upfront planning and then bakes it into the RFP process. Speaking of RFPs, that was the other thing that we did. We worked on this a while back with the Department of General Services, with the Government Operations Agency, and with the Governor's Office to move the procurement of technology projects from the Department of General Services into my department, to the Department of Technology. And again, the focus here was understanding the critical role that a procurement, and a good procurement, plays in setting the stage for a project, right? We wanted to integrate it into the oversight, and integrate it into project planning, and integrate it into an organization that has a stake in the outcome of a procurement. Not just do we have a contract awarded, but does that awarded contract result in a system that's put in place that actually supports the needs of the departments? So that was something else that we moved in. We've done, under Marnell's leadership, we've done a number of things, some of which you've seen, to try and make those procurements more competitive, try to make them less expensive for you all in the bidder community, and to try and make them more transparent. You'll see some more improvements coming in that area now that they don't have to worry so much about the performance rating system. But so that was another thing that we did, again with the focus of trying to improve project performance. We also devoted a lot of time and energy into building up the skill set of the state project team. So some of you have heard about this, our Project Academy series, where we take actual practitioners in government in California that have had the experience of working on projects and go teach the rest of the community. Teach them how do you effectively structure a government structure. How do you run a project? How do you negotiate a contract? How can you tell if a testing model or a testing approach is a good one? How do you do BPR? How do you do organizational change management? And so it's a series of classes that we put in. We've had these classes over the last year and a half, and we probably at this point sent over 1,800 people through these classes. And again, they're taught by practitioners, they're taught by folks that are actually experienced, and then we videotape them and make them available to the folks. If you want to see any of them, they're on our YouTube channel. Again, the idea is to build up the skill set of the state's workforce. The other thing that we do is we partnered with some of the companies out there that put on educational forums, right? Because we don't obviously have all of the answers or all of the experience that we need. So through these companies like PSP, for example, we partner up with you all. You have a lot of expertise and a lot of experience that you can share with us. So as an example, yesterday we had the Project Delivery Summit, or Successful Project Delivery Summit, right? In which we brought state agency project teams again together, and folks that are practitioners, to learn from the best and the brightest in the private sector about how do you successfully deliver projects. But we've done a number of these, again, with the focus of building up the capacity of the state's workforce. We make people go through a more structured planning and approval process. We try to educate them and train them and build up their skill set. We structure and, reform the way we do procurements. But even then, after they've gone through all of that, sometimes organizations have the need, have the business case, and really the willingness to support a technology initiative, but they don't necessarily have the skill set, for example. One of the things that we recognize is sometimes projects get in trouble and they need specialists. They need a SWAT team or a strike team to come in and help them get over a hurdle on whatever the particular issue might be. It might be, putting together a really effective schedule, running a good testing model for their program or for their project. And so we created this division, the Consulting and Planning Division, and it is exactly that. It's a SWAT team of very experienced experts, again, very familiar with government, that we send out and we loan out to departments to help them get over the hurdle. These are kind of short-term engagements, but they've also had really good experience and really successful engagements with the departments. And then most recently, I just announced this on Monday, but we've been working hard at standing up a project management office. Again, sometimes departments have the need, they just don't have the skill set. And if they have it, it's really difficult to hang on to it, right? So we've created a project management office to actually run projects for departments that need expertise on managing projects. It's patterned after the Health and Human Services Agency's Office of System Integration, right, where they run projects, HHS projects for other agencies and other departments. So we stood this up successfully. We're now launched. We're offering services. They're engaged in a couple of different projects already. But in addition to providing actual project management services, we've also given them a couple of other responsibilities. One of which is develop a training curriculum so that we can learn and teach and train project teams as to what do they need to know to be effective in project management. The other thing that we asked them to do is to take a look at the California Project Management Framework, right? They call it CAPMF. Many of you are familiar with that. Well, it had run a little dated, a little stale. So what I've asked them to do is to look at the project management framework and update it. Help it take into account new development methodologies like Agile. Help it take into account all of the things that we've learned as we've gone through the experience of these projects that have been troubled or that have been challenged. How do we deal with cloud technologies? How do we deal with some of the different aspects of contracting now? So the idea is that we're going to create a project management framework that not only will be used by the California PMO, but project teams throughout the state. Again, it'll provide a set of guidelines, a set of tools, a set of templates, and training curriculum for project teams. And then finally, we said, okay, there are some organizations in government that do project management very successfully and that deliver projects on a pretty consistent basis. OSI is one of them, Franchise Task Board is another one. So what I asked the leadership of the California Project Management Office is, I want you to create a council, an advisory council, to help us set the stage and set the standards and the policies to do things like develop the management framework or the training curriculum, to help us do things like figure out how do you structure a career ladder in government so that folks that want to go into project management actually can have a career in it without having to jump around or skip around between projects or agencies. So this Project Management Council, Advisory Council, has been convened to help guide the state as an enterprise in terms of how we do project management. So again, all of these are aimed at trying to improve the way the state does its job, its part of project management. And I bring that out because I want you to understand, and I want you to see this project management, this contractor rating system in context. It's just the next spoke in that hub, right, or in that wheel of trying to make sure that we do a better job on projects. Marnell already talked about how we got to where we are today, right? We engaged, the vendor community, we engaged a number of different stakeholders on the state side that are gonna have to live with this thing, and we asked them for feedback. We actually also did something that I thought was really smart is, after we started to go through this, we went out to our project managers and said, okay, could you live with this? Would it work for you? And got their feedback as well. As we went into this, we decided we're gonna adopt a couple of ground rules. The first ground rule was that as we developed performance indicators or things that we were gonna rate, that they needed to align with actual project challenges. One of the things that really bothered me about our approval process before, maybe even some of the training classes or certifications that we ask people to go and give when they want to do project management, is that they're somewhat academic and theoretical, right? I wanted something much more pragmatic and practical, something focused that would actually address the project challenges that we see on a regular basis. So we asked, as we develop performance indicators, let's make sure that they're aligned with the project challenges that we see on the ground on a day-to-day basis. The other ground rule we adopted was that if we're going to monitor performance, it can't just be a one-time thing. It can't be just at contract signature, or it can't be at the very end as you're getting ready to close everything out. We needed to rate performance throughout the life of a contract, or throughout the life of a project engagement. So part of our ground rules is, let's develop a system that will work throughout the life cycle of a project. A couple of other things that we decided. We decided, okay, the performance indicators need to be pretty straightforward and simple. Again, if they're so convoluted or so theoretical that nobody can really, get their arms around them, they're not going to be used. We wanted them to be objective. We had a meeting with our work group a little earlier in the week where we showed them this. And one of the questions that came up in a concern, which, for me is a pretty valid concern, is, okay, well, what if the guy that you're working with, your project manager, your contract manager, what if they just personally don't like you? What if they just have a beef, or what if they just have a terrible personality? Right? Are they going to get to rate you and you're going to have to live with that? And so we thought, no, it needs to be something objective. It can't be just left up to, hey, I'm feeling really good today because we're in a good spot, so you get an A, or, I've been getting my butt kicked by my exec committee, so you're going to get an F today, right? It needs to be something objective. They need to be measurable, and they need to be manageable and meaningful in terms of addressing issues on the project. Here's the other thing. They needed to be verified, independently supported, if you will. So most of the projects that I see have some level of project oversight, either from my office, and in a lot of cases, IB&B as well, right? So you have external, independent third parties with expertise that often report on and monitor and track projects. In some cases, even the legislature sends people in there, right? Some of the really big ones, like Fiscal, for example, you have the Bureau of State Audits in there watching everything. So we needed to make sure that whatever performance measures we have, they're able to be supported and monitored by project oversight and IB&B. Let me tell you what we got to. Those are the ground rules. We turned the work group loose and said, okay, go do your thing. And so here's what we came up with. When we started out, we got to 45 project focus areas and ended up with 225 key performance indicators. So I thought, I think the community will be pretty happy with that. Ben and Marnell, tried to come through the phone and choke me. So we thought, okay, that's not going to work. We got to get a little bit more focused. We got to get, focus on things that are real. So we, worked really hard, and we trimmed it down to 22 focus areas and 32 performance indicators. Again, we thought, okay, can we really honestly expect somebody to monitor and report on those things? So again, we went out, we showed it to some state project managers and said, hey, can you, if you were running a project and I asked you to rate this, you rate your contractor on this, could you live with that? And they came back and said, no, that's still way too many. So we showed it to them, and then they brought it down and they cut it back to 12 focus areas and 15 performance indicators. Then we brought it back to the office and we had bloody drag out fights. But we thought, okay, that's still too much. It's got to be something much more simple and straightforward. So we ended up with 4 focus areas and 5 performance indicators. So the focus areas obviously are going to be pretty obvious: scope, schedule, quality, and cost. Right? So here are the actual performance indicators that we're going to be using. So in the area of scope, it's going to be pretty straightforward. Did the contractor deliver to the scope as defined in the contract? Right? So obviously that means we've got to get the contract right. We've got to make sure that the scope that we agree to, that we negotiate to, that you bid to and sign up for is well documented in the contract. Now, obviously, sometimes contracts get amended. So whatever the amended official documented contract is, that's what we're going to be asking folks to measure against. Pretty straightforward. Schedule. We decided on a couple of different indicators here. First are the project activities executed according to the approved project plan or schedule, right? So usually when you sign a contract with us, especially on a project, one of the first couple of deliverables, or a couple of the first deliverables, are deliver a project plan, deliver a schedule. Then we haggle over it, and at some point it gets adopted and agreed to, right? So once that is done, we're going to ask, are the deliverables, is the contractor performing its activities according to those schedules and to that approved project plan? The other thing that we're going to ask is deliverables, work products, and tasks on the critical path. Are they started and completed on time, right? Usually you get a little bit of leeway there, but are those on time? Because again, those are key indicators of the health of a project. In the area of cost, we try to keep it pretty simple here too, right? Did you deliver within the cost agreed to in the contract? And again, we recognize that sometimes there's change orders, sometimes there's amendments to contracts. So again, those will be taken into account as well. We'll measure, the baseline will be whatever the official approved contract is or amended contract. And then in the area of quality, essentially it's pretty straightforward. Are the deliverables, are the documentation and work products complete, timely, and of good quality? Those are the performance indicators. That's what we're going to be asking folks to rate, and that's what we're going to be reporting on.